The stagecoach, a bone-jarring cage of faded leather and splintered wood, finally lurched to a halt, its arrival announced by a chorus of groaning springs and the weary snorts of dust-caked horses. Eliza Mallory pressed a gloved hand to the grimy window, peering out at Redemption Gulch. The name, she mused, held a certain grim poetry, a promise of second chances whispered against a backdrop of unforgiving earth. Her heart, a small, hopeful bird, fluttered against her ribs. In her reticule, a worn letter from Arthur Pike, her intended, detailed a life of modest comfort and companionship, a haven from the shadows of her past in the sprawling, indifferent East. She carried little else, a small trunk containing her practical dresses, a few treasured books, and a mind honed by observation, a skill cultivated in quieter, more scholarly pursuits long since abandoned for the stark necessity of survival. She descended onto the rutted main street, the wind immediately snatching at her bonnet, whipping strands of auburn hair across her face. Redemption Gulch was less a town and more a collection of weathered buildings clinging stubbornly to the parched land, all under a sky too vast and too pale. It smelled of dust, horse, and something faintly metallic, like old blood or new ambition. Her gaze scanned the few faces that turned, incurious or openly assessing, searching for Arthur. He had described himself as stout, with kind eyes and a laugh that rumbled. A knot of men stood clustered outside a building signed, Pike's Mercantile, Sundries. This must be it. A fragile smile touched Eliza's lips as she smoothed her travel-stained skirt and began to walk towards them, her steps betraying a nervousness she fought to conceal. As she drew nearer, the low murmur of their voices ceased. One man, tall and gaunt with a face like dried leather, turned. His eyes, small and hard, registered her approach. "You be Miss Mallory?" he asked, his voice flat, devoid of welcome. "I am," Eliza confirmed, her smile faltering. "I am here to meet Mr. Arthur Pike." The man spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. "Reckon you're a bit late for that, ma'am." He gestured with a thumb towards the Mercantile's closed door, a rough-hewn plank with a dark stain seeping from beneath it. "Arthur Pike ain't mating nobody. He's dead." The words struck Eliza with the force of a physical blow. Dead. The hopeful bird in her chest plummeted, its wings broken. The vast sky seemed to press down, suffocating her. "Dead?" she echoed, her voice a thin whisper. Disbelief warred with a rising tide of cold dread. The carefully constructed image of her future, the modest home, the shared laughter, the simple peace shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. The faces of the other men were a blur of detached curiosity, some tinged with a morbid satisfaction. She was a spectacle, a woman arrived for a dead man. One of the younger men, perhaps feeling a sliver of pity, added, "Found him this morning. Looks like a robbery gone bad. Sheriff's in there now." A robbery. Arthur, her gentle correspondent, victim of violence in this harsh, indifferent place. Eliza swayed, the contents of her meager trunk suddenly feeling like an anchor dragging her down. Stranded, alone, the word echoed the emptiness that yawned before her. Her carefully hoarded savings had been spent on the journey, on the new dress folded neatly in her trunk, meant for a wedding that would never happen. Humiliation burned her cheeks, hot and shameful, as she felt the weight of their stares. She had come all this way, invested all her hope, for this, for nothing. The mercantile door creaked open, and a figure emerged, silhouetted against the dim interior. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dusty hat and a star that caught a stray glint of sunlight. Sheriff Caleb Thorne straightened, his gaze sweeping over the small crowd before settling on Eliza. His face was weathered, his eyes a startling, clear gray, like a winter sky. They held no judgment, only a quiet, assessing watchfulness. He took in her pale face, her refined but travel-worn attire, the single trunk at her feet that bespoke her solitary arrival. He moved with a deliberate economy, his presence commanding a certain grudging respect from the onlookers. "This the lady?" he asked, his voice a low rumble, not unkind but firm. The gaunt man nodded. "Miss Mallory, come for Pike." Sheriff Thorne's gaze lingered on Eliza for a moment longer. He saw the shock, the desolation that threatened to overwhelm her. He'd seen that look before, on faces new to the brutalities this land could inflict. "Ma'am," he said, his tone softening almost imperceptibly, "this is a bad business." A terrible welcome. He paused, then gestured towards the building. "Perhaps you'd best come inside. We need to ask you some questions, but out of this sun, at least." Eliza felt a numbness creeping through her, a merciful buffer against the full impact of the disaster. She nodded, unable to speak, and allowed herself to be led past the staring faces into the dim, cool silence of the Mercantile, a place that should have been her future, but was now only a tomb. The air inside was thick with the scent of stale goods, dust, and the undeniable, cloying aroma of death. Her gaze fell upon a dark shape covered by a canvas sheet on the floor near the counter. Arthur. Her hope lay there, extinguished. The hours that followed passed in a haze of grief and disorientation. Sheriff Thorne was methodical, his questions precise, but delivered with a certain rough consideration. He asked about her correspondence with Arthur, when she had last heard from him, if he had mentioned any troubles. Eliza answered as best she could, her voice often trembling, her mind struggling to focus through the fog of shock. She explained she knew little of Arthur's life beyond his letters, which had painted a picture of a quiet, unassuming man, eager for companionship. The small town offered no sanctuary. The only boarding house, run by a sour-faced woman named Martha Grigsby, regarded her with suspicion and charged an exorbitant rate for a tiny, airless room. Eliza sat on the lumpy mattress, her trunk unopened, the letter from Arthur clutched in her hand. The ink was faded, the paper soft from rereading. "I await your arrival with eagerness, my dear Eliza. Redemption Gulch can be a harsh place, but together I believe we can make a fine life here." A tear escaped and traced a cold path down her cheek. The desolation was complete, the silence of the room amplifying the hollowness within her. The wind howled outside, a mournful dirge for her dead dreams, rattling the ill-fitting window pane, as if trying to pry its way into her solitude. Later that evening, a polite but firm knock came at her door. It was Deputy Miller, a young man with earnest eyes, sent by Sheriff Thorne. "Ma'am," he said, twisting his hat in his hands, "the sheriff wondered if you'd be willing to come back to the Mercantile, just to see if anything looks out of place to you. Something Arthur might have mentioned in his letters, something only you might recognize." Eliza felt a flicker of surprise. Why would her observations matter? But the alternative was to remain in this suffocating room, a prisoner of her despair. Perhaps activity, any activity, was better than passive grief. She nodded. "Very well, Deputy." The Mercantile was dimly lit by a few oil lamps, casting long, dancing shadows. Sheriff Thorne stood by the counter, a ledger open before him. He looked up as she entered, his expression unreadable. "Thank you for coming, Miss Mallory," he said. "I know this is difficult." "I want to help, Sheriff, if I can," she replied, her voice steadier than she expected. "Mr. Pike, he seemed a kind man in his letters. He didn't deserve this." Thorne nodded slowly. "No, he didn't." He gestured around the store. "We've been through things. Seems like a simple robbery. Cash box is empty. But something feels off." He looked directly at her. "You read his letters. You knew his turn of phrase, perhaps his habits. Anything strike you?" Eliza walked slowly around the small, cluttered space. Her mind, trained in logic and detail from years spent assisting her late father, a university professor with a passion for antiquarian texts and their hidden narratives, began to function with a chilling clarity. It was a defense mechanism, perhaps, a retreat into the familiar territory of analysis when emotion threatened to drown her. She noted the overturned stool, the scattered papers, the way a sack of flour had spilled, its contents fanned out in a peculiar arc. She touched the cold countertop, her gaze sweeping from the haphazardly stacked tins on the shelves to the floorboards, still bearing faint, scuffed outlines where the body had lain. "He was writing a letter when he was attacked," she said, more to herself than to Thorne. Thorne's head came up. "How do you know?" "The inkwell is still open," Eliza pointed, "and the pen is on the floor beside the ledger, not in its holder. There's a slight smear of fresh ink on the ledger's edge, as if his hand slipped." She moved closer to the counter. "The cash box, was it forced?" Thorne frowned. "No. Looks like it was opened with a key. We haven't found Pike's key yet." "Was anything else taken?" Eliza asked, her eyes scanning the shelves. "Tobacco? Liquor? Those are common targets in a robbery." "Not that we can tell. Just the cash." Eliza's gaze fell upon a small, neatly arranged display of ladies' hair combs and ribbons near the till, surprisingly undisturbed. "Odd, for a panicked thief," she murmured. Then, her eyes narrowed on the spilled flour. It wasn't just a random spread. There was a faint drag mark through it, almost obliterated, leading away from the counter towards a back storeroom. "Did you check the storeroom thoroughly, Sheriff?" Thorne's expression shifted, a flicker of something akin to surprise in his grey eyes. "Miller gave it a once-over, said it was just supplies." "May I?" Eliza asked, already moving towards the storeroom door. He hesitated for only a second. "Go ahead." The storeroom was cramped and smelled of burlap and dried herbs. Eliza's gaze swept across the sacks of grain, the barrels, the hanging tools. Her attention was drawn to a section of the rough plank wall. One of the planks looked newer than the others, its edges less weathered. She ran her fingers along it, then pressed. It gave, slightly. With an effort, she pulled. The plank, cleverly disguised as part of the wall, swung inward on hidden hinges, revealing a small, dark cavity. Inside, nestled on a bed of old rags, was a small, locked strongbox. Thorne, who had followed her in, let out a low whistle. "Well, I'll be." He looked at Eliza, a new respect dawning in his eyes. "How in tarnation did you spot that?" Arthur mentioned in his last letter that he had finally secured his future savings in a place no common thief would think to look, Eliza explained, her voice quiet. "He was a methodical man. The disorder at the counter, it felt performative. Too much chaos for a simple smash and grab, yet too little taken. And that plank, it's a slightly different grain of wood." Thorne procured a pry bar and with some effort forced the strongbox open. It was empty. "So, the killer knew about this," Thorne mused, his gaze thoughtful. "This wasn't a random drifter. This was someone who knew Pike. Knew his secrets." He looked at Eliza again. "Miss Mallory, you have a keen eye." "My father taught me to observe," she said simply, a familiar ache accompanying the memory. He believed the smallest details often told the truest stories. Thorne was silent for a long moment, studying her. "You came here to be a bride, Miss Mallory. Looks like you might have found a different calling in Redemption Gulch." He paused. "I could use an eye like yours. Officially, there's no provision, but unofficially, if you're willing, this town could use some truer stories told." Eliza felt a strange stirring within her, a fragile seedling of purpose taking root in the barren soil of her grief. It wasn't the life she had envisioned, but it was something. A chance to use the skills she possessed, skills she had thought buried. I don't know anything about being a detective, Sheriff." "You know how to see," Thorne said, his voice firm. "In a place like this, that's more than most. Think on it. For now, you should get some rest. We'll talk more tomorrow." He offered her a small, almost imperceptible nod of respect. "Deputy Miller will see you back to the boarding house." As Eliza walked back through the darkened street, the wind felt less like a lament and more like a restless whisper, full of secrets waiting to be unearthed. The town, Redemption Gulch, suddenly seemed less a place of endings and more one of very uncertain, very dangerous beginnings. The next morning, Eliza found Sheriff Thorne already at his cluttered desk in the small, starkly functional jailhouse. He offered her a tin cup of coffee, black and strong enough to strip paint. "Miss Grigsby treating you all right?" he asked, his tone gruff but with an undercurrent of concern. "As well as can be expected," Eliza replied, accepting the cup. The coffee was bitter, but its warmth was welcome. "She makes it clear my presence is unusual. This whole town thinks anything beyond corn liquor and Sunday sermons is unusual," Thorne grunted. "Don't pay it no mind." He gestured to a chair. "About last night. That strongbox. Pike wasn't a rich man. What savings he had wouldn't amount to much. But he was expecting a delivery. Land deeds. He'd bought a parcel up Willow Creek. Paid for it in installments over 2 years. The final deed transfer was due this week." Eliza sipped her coffee, her mind already working. So, the killer wasn't after Pike's meager cash, they were after the land, or preventing him from acquiring it. "My thinking too," Thorne agreed. "Problem is, who knew about the deal besides Pike and the seller? Seller's a man named Jedediah Stone, lives out near Hangman's Bluff. Cantankerous old prospector, keeps to himself. Would he have killed for his own land back if he regretted the sale?" Eliza wondered aloud. "Possible. Or maybe someone else wanted that land. Willow Creek's got good water. That's gold in this territory." Thorne leaned back, his chair creaking a protest. "I need to ride out to Stone's place. Question him. I'd be obliged if you'd look over Pike's mercantile again, more carefully this time. See if you can find any correspondence about this land deal, anything that names names." And so began a strange, unspoken partnership. Eliza spent her days in the quiet, dust-filled mercantile, a place imbued with the ghost of her shattered hopes, yet now also a repository of clues. She meticulously sorted through Arthur Pike's ledgers, his few personal effects, his orders for stock. She found invoices, receipts, notes scrawled in the margins of catalogues. Her methodical approach, born from years cataloguing her father's arcane collections, transformed the mundane records into a narrative. She discovered Arthur was in debt to several suppliers, but not catastrophically so. He was careful, if not prosperous. The townsfolk watched her with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. Whispers followed her like dust devils down the main street. "The mail-order bride, plain detective. Bad luck follows that one. Sheriff's got a strange notion. Letting a woman meddle in men's affairs." Martha Grigsby, her landlady, was particularly acidic, her comments sharp enough to curdle milk. "Should be grieving, not poking her nose where it ain't wanted." Eliza felt the sting of their judgment, the isolation, but a quiet determination had taken root. Arthur Pike deserved justice. And in helping to find it, perhaps she could find some measure of her own redemption, a purpose beyond the one that had been so cruelly snatched away. She learned to ignore the stares, the hushed comments. Sheriff Thorne's quiet, unwavering belief in her abilities was a shield against their scorn. He never questioned her methods, only listened intently to her findings each evening, his grey eyes thoughtful as she laid out the puzzle pieces she had uncovered. One afternoon, sifting through a box of seemingly unimportant receipts tucked away beneath the counter, Eliza found it. A small, folded piece of paper, not a receipt, but a hastily scribbled note. "Pike, stay off Willow Creek. It ain't yours. Last warning." It was unsigned, the handwriting crude and forceful. She felt a chill despite the stuffy heat of the mercantile. This was no abstract land dispute. This was a direct threat. That evening, she presented the note to Thorne. He studied it, his expression grim. "This changes things," he said slowly. "This ain't just about a deed. This is about intimidation, fear." He looked at Eliza, his gaze steady. "You're sure you want to be involved in this, Miss Mallory? It could get dangerous." Eliza met his gaze, her own resolve hardening. The initial shock of Arthur's death had receded, replaced by a cold anger and a burgeoning sense of responsibility. "Someone threatened Mr. Pike, Sheriff, and then they killed him. I can't simply walk away from that, not if I can help." A ghost of a smile touched Thorne's lips. "Didn't think you would." He tapped the note. "This handwriting, it's rough, but there's a peculiar slant to the S." I've seen it before, on a claim dispute notice filed last spring. His eyes narrowed in thought. Belonged to a man named Silas Hackett. Runs a small, failing ranch, bordering Stone's property up Willow Creek. Always thought he was greedy for more land. Silas Hackett, Eliza repeated, filing the name away. Does he have a reputation for violence? He's got a temper like a cornered badger and a thirst for anything that ain't his, Thorne affirmed. And he was seen in town the day Pike was killed, drinking at the saloon, making noise about how some folks get all the luck. The fragile normalcy of their investigative routine was shattered. The threat, once abstract, now had a name, a face. The whispers in town seemed to take on a more menacing tone. Eliza noticed men watching her from the shadows of the saloon porch, their gazes lingering. One evening, as she returned to the boarding house, a stone clattered against the wall beside her head, thrown from the darkness of an alleyway. She hurried inside, her heart pounding, the anonymity of the attack more unnerving than an open confrontation. The next morning, as Eliza prepared to leave for the mercantile, Martha Grigsby confronted her in the narrow hallway, arms crossed, her face a mask of disapproval. "Sheriff Thorne was here," she announced, her voice sharp. "Said you're not to go to the mercantile alone anymore. Said it ain't safe." Her eyes, small and judgmental, raked over Eliza. "Stirring up trouble, that's what you're doing. A woman like you, consorting with the law, digging into things best left buried. It ain't natural." "Mr. Pike was murdered, Mistress Grigsby," Eliza replied, her voice low but firm. "Finding his killer is a matter of justice, not nature." "Justice," the woman sniffed, "or notoriety. Some women crave attention, no matter the cost." Eliza felt a flush of anger but held her tongue. Arguing was futile. But the landlady's words, reflecting the town's suspicion, pricked at her resolve. Was she just a meddler, a jinx? Later that day, Sheriff Thorne himself escorted her to the mercantile. His presence was a silent rebuke to the gossips and a clear statement of protection. He didn't speak of the stone thrown the previous night, nor did she, but his vigilance was palpable. As they walked, Eli Crawford, the town's self-important mayor and owner of the saloon, approached them, his expression one of oily concern. "Sheriff," Crawford began, his gaze flicking dismissively towards Eliza. "This situation with Pike, it's bad for business, bad for Redemption Gulch's reputation. And this involvement," he gestured vaguely at Eliza, "of an outsider, a woman. It's unsettling, folks. Perhaps it's best if Miss Mallory kept a low profile. Let you handle things." Thorne stopped, turning slowly to face the mayor. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet, but it carried the weight of steel. "Miss Mallory is assisting me in this investigation, Mayor. At my request, her insights have been invaluable." He paused, his grey eyes fixing Crawford with an unnerving stare. "And anyone who tries to unsettle her further will have to answer to me. Are we clear, Ellie?" Crawford, flustered by Thorne's directness, stammered a hasty agreement and scurried away. Eliza looked at Thorne, a nascent warmth spreading through her chest. He hadn't just defended her, he had publicly validated her role, her worth. In this harsh, judgmental land, his quiet, steadfast support was an anchor. "Thank you, Sheriff," she said softly. He merely grunted, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "Just stating facts, Miss Mallory. Now, let's see if Pike left us any more clues about Silas Hackett." Their investigation intensified. Thorne rode out to Hackett's ranch, finding him surly and uncooperative, but with no concrete evidence linking him directly to the murder scene. Eliza, meanwhile, pored over Pike's accounts again, this time looking for any transactions or interactions involving Hackett or land near Willow Creek. She found nothing overt, but Arthur Pike had been a meticulous record keeper. He had a small, separate ledger where he noted personal loans and IOUs, often for trivial sums. Tucked into the back pages, she found an entry, SH 50, for surveying services, Willow Creek boundary. Paid in full, Below it another, more recent entry. SH offered 100 to forget survey markers. Refused. Hackett tried to bribe him to misrepresent the property lines. Eliza realized, her pulse quickening. When Pike refused, Hackett threatened him, and when the land deal was about to go through, he made good on his threat. Thorne finished, his face grim. The survey markers would have proven Pike's claim and exposed Hackett's encroachment on stones, and therefore Pike's future land. The evidence was circumstantial, but compelling. They needed something more, something to tie Hackett directly to the murder. The risk was escalating. Hackett was not a man to be trifled with, and he was growing nervous. There were reports of him drinking heavily, making veiled threats against interfering busybodies. The shadows in Redemption Gulch seemed to lengthen, to deepen. Eliza felt a constant prickle of unease, a sense that they were being watched, that the fragile peace they had established was about to be violently shattered. Thorne, too, was on edge, his usual stoicism overlaid with a grim watchfulness. He insisted on escorting Eliza everywhere, his hand rarely far from the Colt peacemaker at his hip. The crisis arrived not with a bang, but with a chilling discovery. Early one morning, Thorne found a crudely drawn caricature of Eliza, a noose around its neck, pinned to the mercantile door with a rusty Bowie knife, a knife known to be Silas Hackett's signature blade. Beneath it, scrawled in charcoal, were the words, "Next time it's real." Thorne's face was a granite mask of fury. "He's gone too far," he growled, ripping the drawing down. "This isn't just a threat against an investigation anymore. This is a threat against you, Eliza." He used her first name without thinking, the formality of Miss Mallory stripped away by the raw immediacy of the danger. Eliza felt a wave of icy fear, but beneath it a surprising surge of anger. She would not be terrorized. She would not let this man, this killer, drive her away or silence her. "He's trying to scare us off, Caleb," she said, her voice trembling slightly but firm. "It means we're close." Their shared fear, their mutual resolve in the face of this blatant menace, forged a new intimacy between them. The unspoken had become spoken. The professional partnership had deepened into something more personal, a bond tempered in the crucible of shared danger. Thorne knew he had to protect her, not just as a witness or an assistant, but as someone who had, against all odds, carved out a place of significance in his solitary life. Eliza, in turn, found a strength she hadn't known she possessed, drawing courage from Thorne's steadfastness. "We need to search Hackett's ranch," Thorne declared, his jaw tight. "Properly this time. He's made his move, shown his hand with this knife. It gives me cause." He looked at Eliza. "I need you to stay here, in the jail. It's the safest place. Lock yourself in my office. Don't open the door for anyone but me or Deputy Miller." "But Caleb—" "No arguments, Eliza. Not this time." His voice was iron. "I won't risk you." While Thorne and Miller rode out to Hackett's ranch, armed with a warrant hastily secured from the circuit judge who was passing through town, Eliza remained in the claustrophobic confines of the sheriff's office. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the ticking of the wall clock and the distant sounds of the town. She tried to focus, to think, to piece together the final elements of the puzzle. The knife was Hackett's, the threats were his, the motive, the land was his. But where was the definitive proof he was the one who plunged a blade into Arthur Pike? Hours crawled by. The sun climbed, baking the small building. Eliza paced, her mind racing. She thought of the spilled flour in the mercantile, the drag mark. Had Hackett been looking for something specific? The strongbox, yes. But what if there was something else? Arthur's letters had mentioned he kept meticulous notes on everything, a habit from my days as a clerk. Where would he keep notes too sensitive for his regular ledgers? Her gaze fell upon Thorne's own desk, surprisingly neat despite its clutter. He had a small, locked drawer. A thought struck her. Arthur was methodical. He had a hidden strongbox. What if he had another, smaller hiding place in the mercantile, somewhere even more cunning? She remembered the slightly loose floorboard near the counter, the one she had initially dismissed as simple wear and tear. It was close to where he had fallen. She had to get back to the mercantile. Waiting was an agony. When Thorne and Miller finally returned, dust-covered and grim-faced, Eliza barely gave them time to speak. Hackett wasn't there, Thorne reported, his voice laced with frustration. Ranch was deserted. Looks like he cleared out, but we found this in his cabin. He laid a blood-stained shirt on the desk. Could be Pike's blood. We'll need to confirm. Caleb, Eliza said urgently, I need to go to the mercantile. There's a floorboard. I think Arthur might have hidden something there. Notes, perhaps, about Hackett's threats, his attempts at bribery. Thorne looked at her, then at the shirt. Hackett on the run was a dangerous, unpredictable animal, but Eliza's intuition had been unerring so far. All right, he said slowly. Miller, you stay here. Keep an eye on things. Eliza, you come with me, but you stay close. Understand? The mercantile felt cold, alien. The late afternoon sun cast long, eerie shadows. Thorne stood guard by the door, his shotgun held ready, while Eliza went straight to the spot she remembered. Using the tip of Thorne's Bowie knife, she carefully pried at the edges of the floorboard. It resisted, then gave with a faint groan. Beneath it, in a shallow recess, lay a small, oilskin-wrapped packet. Her fingers trembled as she unwrapped it. Inside was a slim notebook and several folded documents. The notebook contained dated entries in Arthur Pike's neat hand, detailing Silas Hackett's increasingly aggressive attempts to intimidate him over the Willow Creek land, his offers of bribes, his veiled threats. The documents were copies of survey maps, clearly showing Hackett's existing property lines and the extent of his illegal encroachment. And then, the final damning piece of evidence, a promissory note for a large sum of money signed by Silas Hackett, payable to a shadowy figure known only as Mr. Blackwood. With Pike's land at Willow Creek listed as collateral, Hackett clearly expected to acquire. He was deeply in debt, Eliza breathed, looking up at Thorne. He needed Pike's land not just for greed, but to save himself from ruin. When Arthur wouldn't sell and couldn't be bribed or scared off, Hackett killed him, thinking he could then claim the abandoned land or strong-arm Jedediah Stone. And Blackwood? Thorne asked, his eyes hard. Sounds like a loan shark, probably the one financing Hackett's desperation. Suddenly, a shadow fell across the doorway. Silas Hackett stood there, no longer the swaggering bully, but a cornered animal, his eyes wild, a hunting rifle clutched in his hands. Should have left it alone, Sheriff. He snarled, his gaze flicking to Eliza. And you, mail-order bitch, poking your nose where it ain't wanted. Thorne moved almost before Hackett finished speaking, pushing Eliza behind him, raising his shotgun. It's over, Hackett. We know everything. Not yet, it ain't, Hackett yelled, leveling his rifle. The shot exploded in the confined space, deafeningly loud. Eliza screamed as she saw Thorne stumble, a dark stain blossoming on his shoulder. But Thorne, though hit, didn't go down. He fired the shotgun. The blast caught Hackett in the chest, sending him staggering backward, out of the doorway and into the street, where he collapsed in a heap. Silence descended, thick and ringing. Eliza rushed to Thorne's side. Caleb, are you all right? Flesh wound, he grunted, wincing as he pressed a hand to his bleeding shoulder. Damn fool nearly got me. His eyes, though pained, were clear. He looked at the oilskin packet in Eliza's hand. You found it, Eliza. You found the truth. Townsfolk, drawn by the gunshots, began to gather outside, their faces a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity. Deputy Miller burst in, his gun drawn. Sheriff, what happened? Hackett's down, Thorne said, leaning heavily against the counter. Miss Mallory found the proof we needed, all of it. As Miller and a few brave townsmen tended to Hackett, who was dead, and helped Thorne, Eliza stood holding the damning evidence. She looked out at the faces in the crowd. Their expressions were changing. The suspicion, the judgment, was slowly being replaced by something else. Awe, respect. She wasn't just the unlucky mail-order bride anymore, or the meddling woman. She was the one who had, with quiet courage and sharp intellect, faced down a killer and brought justice to Arthur Pike. In the days that followed, Redemption Gulch buzzed with the story. Eliza Mallory, the quiet woman who arrived with nothing but a trunk and a broken heart, had solved the murder that had shaken their small community. Thorne, his arm in a sling, made sure everyone knew the extent of her contribution. He spoke of her keen observation, her logical mind, her bravery. The town council, led by a newly humbled Mayor Crawford, even voted to offer her a modest reward from town funds, which she quietly accepted, knowing it would give her a measure of independence. The threat of Silas Hackett was neutralized. The shadow of Mr. Blackwood remained, a lingering thread of corruption that Thorne vowed to pursue, but the immediate danger had passed. Eliza found herself no longer an outcast. Martha Grigsby offered her a grudging cup of tea, a silent admission of her misjudgment. Other women, once aloof, now nodded to her in the street, some even stopping to ask her opinion on small, everyday puzzles, as if her detective skills extended to all life's minor mysteries. She did not take the next stagecoach out of Redemption Gulch. The life she had come for was gone, but a new, unexpected one had taken its place. Caleb Thorne, recovering from his wound, found his small office subtly reorganized, his case files systematically ordered. He'd find Eliza there most mornings, a cup of coffee already brewed, her intelligent eyes scanning the latest territorial newspapers for any whisper of crime or injustice. Their partnership, forged in crisis, had solidified into a comfortable, unspoken alliance. It was not a conventional courtship, nor a traditional domestic arrangement, but it was a bond of deep mutual respect, shared purpose, and a quiet, growing affection that neither felt the need to name. One crisp autumn morning, months later, Sheriff Thorne walked into his office to find Eliza studying a crude map. A rancher from the high country had reported cattle rustled, a common enough crime, but with a few peculiar details. "Morning, Caleb," she said, looking up with a small smile that reached her eyes that no longer held the haunted look of grief, but the bright spark of keen intelligence. "I think I see a pattern here. The rustlers are avoiding the main trails, but they left something behind, something they wouldn't have if they were locals." Thorne leaned over her shoulder, his good arm resting lightly on the back of her chair. He looked at the map, then at her animated face. Redemption Gulch was still a harsh place, the land unforgiving. But for Eliza Mallory, it had become a place of purpose, a place of belonging. She was no longer just a mail-order bride who had found her groom dead. She was Eliza Mallory, the woman who saw what others missed, the quiet mind that brought order to chaos, the unexpected detective of Redemption Gulch. And for Caleb Thorne, and for the town itself, that was more than enough. It was, in its own way, a kind of salvation. The wind still whispered secrets through the gulch, but now there was someone listening, someone who understood their language.